and U.S. military activities over Libya. I urge my colleagues to join me in opposing adoption of S.J. Res. 20. I thank the Chair, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would just briefly like to say that the matter of the merits of the Libyan resolution that the Majority Leader wants to move to is not something I'm addressing at this point. It's a significant issue, and good senators can disagree about that. But the reason we're here this week is because 46, I believe it was, senators from the Republican side objected to the Memorial Day recess because we've done nothing on the budget, and it was clear we were going to object again when we came to the 4th of July, because we've got the debt ceiling that we're told creates an emergency by August 2nd. We haven't passed a budget in 797 days. The Democratic majority has not even brought one up to the floor in that long. And the country is spending itself into decline and damaging the future of our nation. We know that. It's been talked about for months. We've had no discussion in the Budget Committee, of which I'm ranking member, marking up any kind of budget this year. The Budget Act, United States Code, says we should pass a budget by April 15th. So the objection that I had and others had to going home and recessing this week was not to discuss the Libyan resolution. It was to get to work now to confront the financial situation that we're in. And we are not going to be serving our constituents well if some sort of secret agreements reach fruition and a bill is plopped down on the Senate floor August 1st and asked to be and demanded to be passed by August 2nd. That's not responsible. It's not acceptable. Even the President understands that, and last week he said this. And so there's no point in procrastinating. There's no point in putting it off. We've got to get this done. And if by the end of the week we've not seen substantial progress, then I think members of Congress need to understand we're going to start having to cancel things and stay here till we get it done. And he's talking about spending, debt, the debt ceiling, the limit on the amount of money the United States government can borrow. That's what he said last week. That's what we've been saying for over a month. So, regardless of how one feels about the Libyan resolution, that's not what we need to be doing this week. The letter we wrote to Senator Reid concerning the Memorial Day recess said this. This was a month ago. Until a budget plan is made public and until that plan is scheduled for committee action, on what basis can the Senate justify returning home for a one-week vacation and recess when our spending and debt continue to spiral dangerously out of control? Close quote. That's what we said then. That remains true now. This Congress is acting in an irresponsible manner, and it's not healthy for us. I'm beginning to wonder if the United States Senate is, in fact, beginning to lose its reason for being. Are we just sit here and wait for 2 or 3, 4, 5 people to meet in secret and then tell us in the last 11th hour, 11.5 hours, that we've got to pass a bill? Is that legislating? Is that what Congress should do? We certainly are in violation of the Budget Act that says a budget should be commenced to be marked up in the Budget Committee by April 1st and passed by April 15th. Haven't even called one up. Haven't had one in 797 days. So, Mr. President, I would just recall, as we make the decision on our vote today, what the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, has said recently, and that is that the greatest threat to our national security is a debt. That's what he said. The President has not asked for the Libyan resolution. It's not something he cares about, apparently. Hadn't asked for it. He doesn't consider it important. I'll tell you one thing that we've got to do. We've got to fulfill our responsibility as Congress, as the people who control the purse. That's our ultimate constitutional responsibility. We're not fulfilling it, and therefore I would urge my colleagues not to move to the Libyan resolution, but send them a message to our Democratic leadership that we intend to insist that we move toward considering the financial crisis this nation faces. I thank the Chair and will yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, as of now, we are scheduled to vote on a motion to proceed to Senate Joint Resolution 20 regarding Libya. Mr. President, we have been called into session having made plans to spend this week in our states meeting with constituents as we try to do at least once a month. But we've been called back in because there is a budget crisis in this country, because we have a debt ceiling of over $14 trillion that is getting ready to be hit. And we need to focus on that and that alone during this week. We've been talking about it. We've been talking around it. And honestly, Mr. President, we don't seem to be making much progress. If we're going to do anything this week, we should be talking about how we are going to address this issue. This is what is on the mind of the people of our country today. I have been home over the weekend, just got back, and everyone I talk to is scared to death about this debt, about what is going to happen. People think there does need to be significant change, reform, a different way of doing business than just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. They're also concerned about hitting the debt ceiling and not lifting it. And they're wondering, what in the heck are you going to do? So now we're back here in session because of that crisis, and somehow we're talking about Libya. Now, Libya is important. It's important because there are American troops, part of a coalition that had been put there by the President without really consulting Congress. And now there is a resolution which, frankly, I could not support. I will not give the President authority to continue this. I think we need a full and fair debate on that. But now is not the time to be doing that when we are 4 weeks away from a potential debt crisis that could affect our people in our country right now, people who depend on our government to function, as well as our global standing. So let's talk about what we could do. What we could do is produce a budget. It has been 797 days or so since the Senate has passed a budget resolution. So we haven't set the level of spending and the priorities for spending that Congress, which is our constitutional responsibility, it is Congress's to pass a budget. We haven't passed a budget in almost 2 years. Almost 2 years. Now, we have got to do that because we're coming on about 3 months from the end of a fiscal year. We should be passing appropriations bills that are based on a budget, but we don't have a budget. And I would say let's go back to basics. When you have a big problem, you go back to the basics where you have to start to solve a problem. And the basics are a budget. If we can agree on a budget, and heck, I think we all agree that if we get one on the floor, there are going to be a lot of amendments. There are going to be a lot of amendments to a budget resolution. Let's get started. Let's use this week to produce a budget resolution, and let's start having the amendments about spending levels, about spending priorities. That will be a way that we can start the process of determining if we can, in fact, lift the debt ceiling, because there are significant cuts in the spending in this country that would show the rest of the world that is holding our debt, as well as the American people who are living with this government and holding part of the debt, that we're serious, that we are going to get our financial house in order, and we're going to do it with a budget resolution that cuts spending and sets priorities like every family and every business in this country are required to do. And most states, by the way, are required to do it as well. A few don't, and we see them sort of ambling over toward the B word, bankruptcy, and that's not a possibility. That is not a possibility for this country, and we need to take the reins right now to assure that the world knows we are not going to handle our fiscal responsibilities by continuing to borrow when we know we don't have the revenue coming in to pay for all of these programs. So, Mr. President, I'm going to vote against cloture today. I'm going to vote against cloture along with, I know, many people for different reasons. Some people are voting against cloture because they don't think we ought to be giving the President the authority to continue going into another country's civil war when we have such commitments in Afghanistan and Iraq, when we are over-deploying our troops, when we are spending money that we are having to borrow, when we are taking the lion's share of this responsibility for our allies. Many of us think that we shouldn't be adding another country where it's supposed to be a support function, but we all know that that is what leads to something more and then something more, and I thought Senator Lugar said it very well. Then you have the aftermath of the end of a civil war and the responsibilities for that. So this is not the time, in my opinion, to be giving that kind of authority to the President. But above that, we are here because there is a crisis upon which I think we have a united view of the goal, and that is to put our fiscal house in order, but we're not united in the United States Senate about how to do it. So let's have that debate this week. Let's have that debate that says we should be spending more or we should be spending less, that we should be taxing more or taxing less, because we've got real disagreements on that. I'm the spend less, tax less group, but there are views that are differing. Let's put it out there and start the debate, because if we have a budget resolution, then everything can be solved from there. If we have a budget resolution that we can agree is the right amount of spending for the debt crisis we're in, then we will know the way forward to dealing with the debt crisis. That's a real possibility, and that's what we ought to be talking about. I will not support cloture on a motion to proceed to a Libya agreement that the President can continue the United States involvement. I think we need to deal with the crisis that Congress has a say in doing. Certainly Congress had a say in producing it, and we are the ones responsible to the American people for solving the problem that has been created. So, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues not to vote for cloture on the motion to proceed on the Libya resolution, and instead turn to the budget, put a budget resolution out, and for the first time in almost 2 years, we can begin the walk together to solve this problem by passing a budget resolution that will lower spending, hopefully keep taxes low so that our fragile economy can continue on the path toward improvement rather than putting obstacles in place that would have businesses feel confident to hire people and get this unemployment rate of over 9% off the books. That would be the answer for this week, in my opinion, and I hope that the Majority Leader will turn to the budget. Let's solve the crisis at hand. I think that's why we're in session this week. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
What do I do when someone finishes?
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to put us in a quorum call.
Without objection, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, the Senate was scheduled today at 5 o'clock to vote on the motion and vote cloture on the motion to proceed to the bipartisan Libya Resolution, which was sponsored by Senators Kerry, McCain, Levin, Kyle, Durbin, Feinstein, Graham, and others. I've spoken with the Republican leader just a short time ago, and we've agreed, notwithstanding the broad support for the Libya resolution, the most important thing for us to focus on this week is the budget. And so we'll work to set up a vote on the Senate resolution that I have offered on shared sacrifice and perhaps a Republican alternative as well. Meetings are in process now and will continue on the debt limit and larger budget matter throughout the Capitol. And I'm confident everyone knows the White House is involved in these. So I ask unanimous consent the cloture motion with respect to the motion to proceed to calendar number 88, SJ Res 20 be vitiated.
Without objection.
I withdraw my motion to proceed to calendar number 88, SJ Res 20.
The motion is withdrawn.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 93, S 1323.
The clerk will report.
And that's 1323.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 93, S 1323, a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit.
Mr. President, there will be a vote at 5 p.m. today on a motion to instruct the Sergeant Arms to notify senators of their need of attendance in the United States Senate at this important time in our country's history. Would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to extend on some remarks that I made on the Senate on June the 6th. The report that I was reporting on June the 6th evaluated audits produced by the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General in fiscal year 2010. I called that report a report card because that's exactly what it was. 113 unclassified reports published in fiscal year 2010 was reviewed and evaluated and graded in 5 categories. My report was produced by the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General in fiscal year 2010. After each report was graded individually, all the scores for each report in each category were added up and averaged to create a composite score for all 113 reports. Although 15 top quality audits were highlighted in the report, the overall score awarded to the 113 was basically D-. That's low, I know. Maybe the score should have been a little higher. Clearly, none reflected any of the reforms that Inspector General Hedel of DOD put in place in December 2010, as all were published well in advance of that date. My oversight staff read these reports as educated consumers. We expected these reports to provide leverage in the monumental day-to-day Department of Defense oversight task. We want them to provide assurance that the Defense Department is spending taxpayers' money wisely. Some reports did that, but most did not. This report, prepared by this senator from Iowa, is sure of one thing. The audits, which are the subject of my report card, are not somehow exempt from oversight and public scrutiny. In other words, these audits should just not sit on the shelf and collect dust. They need as well to be put under public microscope, especially when they cost almost $1 million apiece to produce. $1 million for an audit report is a heck of a lot of money. So that's exactly what we did in the report card. Put these reports in the public spotlight, and I will keep them there until I see sustained improvement at the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. As the report states, and as I explained in my speech on June the 6th, this grading system was subjective and imperfect. However, as subjective and inexact as it may be, I believe it provided a reasonable and rough measure of audit quality. Following my speech, the Defense Department Inspector General Hedel pounced on my report. He expressed strong opposition to the low score. He complained that it did not adequately reflect $4 2/10 billion in what he called achieved monetary benefits, end of quote, identified in fiscal year 2010 reports. To address IG Hedel's concerns, my staff asked the Audit Department to prepare an information paper that linked the $4 2/10 billion in savings to the audit where those savings were reported. That information was provided to me on June the 20th. I call it a crosswalk. It takes me to the exact page of each report where the savings were discussed. This document lists $4 4/10 billion in identified potential monetary benefits and collections of $4 2/10 billion. After reviewing the crosswalk, I have concluded that Inspector General Haddell had a legitimate gripe about my report card. He is right. It should have included a section that addressed potential savings, so I will address those issues right now, focusing on 4 reports that contain almost all of the $4 2/10 billion in savings listed in the collections column. In grading these reports, we did not give sufficient credit for potential savings and inefficiencies. They were casualties of the grading system for one simple reason. If the exact dollar amounts of the alleged fraud and waste were not verified using primary source accounting records, and using primary source accounting records are very important, then they did not pop up on my oversight radar screen. My staff is attempting to work with the Audit Office to develop a mutually agreed upon set of standards for grading audits. The purpose of these discussions would be to create a grading process that would accurately capture the true quality of all reports, including policy reviews that uncover real savings and efficiencies. From the beginning, I've been very critical of the Audit Office for producing far too many policy reviews and far too few hardcore contract and payment audits. For the most part, the policy audits have no measurable monetary impact whatsoever. However, I have learned recently that at least a few are important for other reasons. I'm told that some of these reports are of real value in the work of our Armed Services Committee here in the Senate. Contract and payment audits are also very important, and I would say most important. They go right to the heart of the IG's core mission, to root out and deter fraud, waste, and theft. If done right, they too can produce big payoffs. Those audits earn top scores in my report card. I'm not saying that the Audit Office should do nothing but contract and payment audits. What I am saying is this: the current mix of audits creates a huge imbalance in favor of policy reviews as opposed to monetary reviews. So a better balance needs to be established by the Inspector General's office. That said, I have an admission to make to my colleagues. I finally found a policy audit that I like. This report is entitled Recapitalization and Acquisition of Light Tactical Wheeled Vehicles. That audit report is number 2010-039, dated January 29, 2010. It identified potential savings of $3.84 billion. That's 90% of the savings uncovered in all the fiscal year 2010 audits. Now, in my report card, I gave this audit a low grade. This audit failed to connect the dots on the money trail and verify dollar amounts using primary source contracts and payment methods. Plus, it took 16 months to complete. When you add the 4 to 6 months of planning that often precede an audit start date, you're probably looking at 2 years to complete the audit, and that's far too long. But this report had other important qualities that were overlooked. It uncovered gross violation of applicable procurement regulations, including the use of sole source contracting arrangements. It also determined that the proposed vehicle might duplicate the capabilities of existing vehicles. In the midst of this audit, for reasons that remain unclear, the project manager decided to stop the program and, quote, put the $3.84 billion in funding to better use in fiscal years 2010 to 2013. This language suggests that all of the money was reallocated within Army accounts for other purposes. Clearly, the audit may have helped to stop $3.84 billion in potential waste. That's excellent, But this does not constitute savings in the classical sense, as all the money was shifted to other Army projects. Waste could have happened in those other projects as well. And it reminds me, while we're here in session in what normally would be a recess, and I'm reporting that the Inspector General found $3.84 billion in potential waste, that now that they're trying to find trillions to cut down on the budget deficit, it might be a time to look at the Defense Department and stop the reprogramming of money. If it's going to be saved, it ought to be saved. And that means that it would cut down on